Wii U needed to fail, because if it didn't, then we would have gotten Devil's Third too. In all seriousness, everything great that Nintendo has done this generation, from the Switch to theme parks, movies, etc., are all a direct result of the gigantic flop that was the Wii U. Look, we all know the story about the Wii U, so I'm not going to talk about how it was one of Nintendo's biggest failures, only selling 13 million units. Nintendo executives had to cut their pay down, and they had to rush out their next console sooner than later. You all know how it went. I'm not going to talk about that. Instead, I'm going to discuss why it was necessary for this console to fail. Basically, how Nintendo having a slice of humble pie ultimately led them to the gargantuan success that was the Nintendo Switch. Of course, there is the saying, the Wii U walked so the Switch could run. And that's mainly due to the fact that the Switch, while being a new console, was still pretty much an extension of the idea that the Wii U introduced, that being a handheld home console hybrid. Most games on Wii U supported off-TV play, so it was already kind of a portable in that regard. However, the gamepad tablet had to be in a certain range of the Wii U console in order for it to operate, so it was never a purely portable system. That didn't stop me taking the whole thing to an airport so I could keep playing Xenoblade Chronicles X, true story. In that sense, the Switch was a perfect continuation of that idea. Sure, some elements couldn't possibly be carried over, such as backwards compatibility and dual-screen gameplay for games like Super Mario Maker 2, but as you can tell by the numbers, many more people were enticed to pick up a Switch than they ever were a Wii U. Former Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé even said something like this at GeekWire Summit. "If we had not had the Wii U, we would not have the Switch. What we heard from customers was that the proposition of a tablet on which they could experience gameplay, coupled with the ability to play games on the TV, is really compelling. Users were telling us, I want to play with this tablet, but when I get 30 feet away from the TV, it disconnects. The one point gamers all hate is the point where they have to put the controller down. So it was an important step for us to be able to deliver on this proposition." And that's basically it. The Switch was like a Wii U in that you could play games in handheld mode or on the TV. However, you could take this thing anywhere you went, and it also didn't have a bunch of unnecessary features like that camera. Did anyone use that Wii U camera?
I'm hungry now.
Use cameo regime.
That said, there were a number of things Nintendo learned during this harsh generation for them. That being, you can't rely on a name alone to be successful. Nintendo was riding high on the success of the Wii, which sold over 100 million units. So naturally they thought, hey, if we call the next console Wii something, that'll definitely give us more money. In fact, when speaking to Time magazine, former Nintendo president Tatsumi Kimishima said that this is exactly what happened behind the scenes. Wii at this point has sold over 100 million units worldwide, and even though there are people saying, hey, since the Wii was so successful, Wii U is also going to be successful, and it's also going to sell like wildfire as well. I looked at that global install base and said that it might not sell as well. It's interesting hearing this, especially because we're on the verge of the Switch successor, and it feels like Nintendo's gotta take points from this quote as well when transitioning over to the next console, but that's something we'll get to later on in this video. But yes, this was a hard lesson Nintendo had to learn from the Wii U's failure. A name alone is not going to sell systems. Maybe this is something they should have known for a while, because this happened with the NES to the Super NES. Same with the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance. The DS to the 3DS. Now, these consoles still wound up selling fine, despite selling less than their predecessors, but in the Wii U's case, it was a lot less. Not to mention that name Wii U isn't exactly clear enough. I knew many people who thought that the Wii U was just a tablet accessory to the Wii, and this is what many people thought, and Reggie Fils-Aimé even admitted that this was a problem. When that console was announced, it was confusing. They focused only on the controller and not the system itself. Yeah, it was seen in the trailers, but if you blinked, you'd have missed it. If you can't see it here though, it's to the right of this sign that says subscribe to GameXplain and hit that notification bell. You're welcome. Reggie said, quote, "When we launched Wii U, we missed the opportunity to be clear on the concept, to show off its capabilities and what the users could do. And that hurt us. Sales were also hurt during the beginning of its lifespan by the lack of games. Even Reggie knew that this reveal was disastrous. And it wasn't made any clearer in the marketing because they still focused on the tablet and not the console itself, and that console looked a lot like the Wii. Yeah, it was different a little bit, but not that much. Nintendo undoubtedly learned from this marketing error. When they revealed the Switch, it was crystal clear what this thing could do. Even the name Nintendo Switch perfectly describes what it does, switching between the handheld to the TV. The logo also conveys this idea really well. As opposed to whatever the Wii U was supposed to mean. What is that, a horseshoe? A horseshoe? Oh, I get it now. The Switch ads were also quite a bit different than the Wii and Wii U's. Those advertisements focused a lot on the family dynamic. It's strange though, because even though Nintendo said the Wii U was focused more on you, the player, you, the individual,
the game will probably still be right for all of us, but could it also be a perfect fit just for you?
Despite them stating this, they still had a lot of family advertisements, and not to mention multiplayer games. A lot of their first-party games during this generation had multiplayer in them or were designed around multiplayer. Mario 3D World being a great example. Tropical Freeze even had that multiplayer element. They even made Animal Crossing multiplayer with Amiibo Festival. Yeah, that series has always had a multiplayer element, but not like a couch party game. It was bizarre. And even though the Switch still has a fair share of multiplayer-focused games and ads, I remember the majority of them around the time the console was revealed were centered around adults, mostly playing single-player games, while also doing, you know, adult responsibilities, like walking your oversized dog, taking a business trip, or cooking some brekkie. I especially want to talk about that Switch Super Bowl ad, because even though the extended ad had a lot of Wii-like moments with lots of people playing party games together, in the 30-second version that actually played during the Super Bowl, it was focused on this one guy waking up, making breakfast, and playing Breath of the Wild. I don't want to say Nintendo during this time outright ignored the casual crowd, for lack of a better term, but they remembered that there's a crowd of people who've been playing games their whole life and want something a little more tailored to their tastes instead of the multiplayer-focused casual experiences that the Wii and Wii U were known for. Don't get me wrong though, the Switch still has plenty of those kinds of Wii Sports-like games, like Nintendo Switch Sports. But you can't deny that this Switch generation has a lot more core experiences focused on the individual. Heck, it even launched with Breath of the Wild, which is very much a single-player core experience with a massive open world and hundreds of hours of content. Even still, after that, Super Mario Odyssey went back to the 3D Mario roots, with again, lots of content, maybe not as much as Breath of the Wild, but there's a lot of moons in that game, baby. And don't even get me started on the other experiences like Fire Emblem, Xenoblade, Metroid. These are games made for people like me who've been playing for a very, very long time, but there are still games for the non-seasoned gamers. You know, the Mario Karts, Mario Parties, Animal Crossings, and ARMS's. While the Wii U generation still had some of those core experiences like Bayonetta 2, and it even still got Breath of the Wild at the end of its life, there weren't nearly as many of those experiences as there were in the Switch generation, and it feels great that Nintendo has recognized those groups of people, as indicated by the library of this machine. And you know what else? If it wasn't for the Wii U's failure, then we wouldn't have Super Nintendo World, the Mario movie, the upcoming Zelda film, and Pikmin Bloom, which Miyamoto keeps asking you to play, so play it already. It was during the Wii U generation that Nintendo began broadening their IP beyond video games, simply because that market wasn't doing very well for them at the time. Starting with Super Nintendo World, this deal came about in 2015, which began plans for Nintendo-themed parks in Universal Studios Japan, Hollywood, and Orlando, the last of which has yet to be completed. That's also when the joint venture with DNA came about. Nintendo finally swallowed their pride and put their games on mobile platforms, with apps like Miitomo, Super Mario Run, Fire Emblem Heroes, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, Mario Kart Tour, and Pikmin Bloom. Wow, that's actually more than I remember there being. While they haven't released nearly as many mobile games in the past decade as console games, they still updated the mobile ones quite frequently to keep users engaged, which is pretty much how most mobile titles work anyway. And now there are the movies, such as the Super Mario Bros. Movie and the upcoming live-action Zelda film. Now these have been in talks for a while before the Wii U was even a thing, but I'm certain that if the Wii U didn't flop as badly as it did, then we'd be living in a world where these movies didn't happen. because ultimately these theme park, mobile, and movie deals weren't just a response to the Wii U's failure, they're also a fail-safe for any future Nintendo console flopping. The company has to make sure they're making money one way or another, and bringing their IP to places other than games is a smart move. And the results speak for themselves, as Nintendo is now more profitable than they've ever been. And though we can thank the success of the Switch for that, we also have to thank the failure that was the Wii U. Like I said at the beginning, this console humbled Nintendo so much. They learned that they could not rely on a name alone to sell consoles, and it also encouraged them to expand their IPs beyond the horizons of games. So, thank you Wii U, your sacrifice was necessary for Nintendo to be where they are today. But now it's time we talk about the Switch successor and how Nintendo can apply their lessons from the Wii U to their next machine. I already said they couldn't rely on the name alone to sell consoles, and I think we're all expecting the Switch successor to have Switch in its name somewhere, so how can Nintendo avoid making the mistakes of the Wii U all over again? Well, for one, the name has to be uber concise. Something like Switch U is not gonna cut it, and I really feel like it's dangerous for them to call it something other than Switch 2. It might be called something different. I'm fully expecting Nintendo to embrace the weird a little bit and call it something like a Super Switch or a Switch XL. Probably not that one. But I still think they could pull off having a successor to the Switch if they just look at what the Wii U did wrong with its name, with its so-called hook, and basically just find a way to make it clear that this is a new console and not just a new version of the Switch, like a Switch OLED XL or something. Nintendo has stated that they have to be very careful about their transition to the next console, because I know they are well aware of that transition from the Wii to Wii U and how much of a disaster that was. So now that we've found out these past 7 years that Nintendo definitely learned from the failures of the Wii U, let's hope that they can learn from the Switch's success as well.